6. Cal paced back and forth, clenching sweaty fists at the idea of being in George's house. This oversized mansion. This beacon of everything he hated about the Udens. Well, not all Udens. Just some of them. The ones like Jord. The ones looked down on him. On everyone. He couldn't take it any longer. Where was Shay? She had told him to wait and be patient. Not Cal's strong suit. And right now wasn't the time for patience. It was the time for action. The time for getting Ovette. Cal slammed his fist against the wall, a futile attempt to push away the pounding in his palms and calm the thump of blood in his veins. It made his skin feel hot, made the room feel small, closed off. If Shay wasn't going to help him, then he'd just have to do it himself. He'd find Ovette. Shay had said she'd been taken to the Citadel. All he had to do was get through the smelt mines. Somehow. Rescue Ovette. Somehow. And bring her back home. Somehow. He stomped over to the door, swinging it open and eliciting a startled yelp from Shay. She froze, her hand outstretched toward the handle. "Oh, you're still awake." She composed herself quickly, adopting her customary coolness. Smug and arrogant was all Cal saw. "Here, I brought you something to eat." Stepping inside, she shoved 2 paper packets into Cal's chest. The corner of whatever was inside of one of the packets broke off as he fumbled to catch it. "What are these?" "Military rations," Shay replied, her expression condescending. "I told you I'd get you some." She sat herself down on the bed, propping herself up on her palms. "Right. Thanks." Cal stared at the packets, the gnawing in his stomach countered by the moisture seeping through the packet's lining. Both dry and moist at the same time. Yeah. Eat." Her eyes wandered around the room, not landing on anything in particular. "Nice place they've got here, huh? Ever thought about living somewhere like this?" Cal tore open the first packet and was treated to the smell of cocoa mixed with dried oats. It wasn't an altogether unpleasant smell compared to the slop he'd eaten over the years. The yellow-brown square had an unappetizing sheen to them, and it crumbled apart even more as he tried to squeeze it out of the packet. The crumbs pattered to the floor, and Shay chuckled to herself as she watched him. "Trust me, you don't want to wait too long. The quicker you eat them, the better it'll be." She turned her head away, her shoulders shivering almost imperceptibly. Cal took one last look at the clump of food in his hand before biting off as much as he could in one go. The texture hit him before the taste. The sheen that coated the entire brick was an intensely sugary syrup. It made the clump stick to the roof of his mouth and between his teeth as he chewed. The taste was bland, save for the sweetness of the syrup coating. No hint of cocoa or oats could be discerned. Swallowing was one of the most difficult things he'd done all day. "Told you you'd prefer not to have tasted them," Shay said. Her expression told Cal everything he needed to know about his own. Despite the initial experience, Cal took another bite. And then another, until the first packet was empty, his hunger overriding the taste. "I've had worse." He gulped, swallowing the final bite, and looked around the room for something to drink. As if reading his thoughts, Shay tossed over a small canteen. "Feel free to eat mine. They're designed to have everything a prefect needs. But if you ask me, ugh." Her shoulders shook again. Cal took long draws from the canteen, halving its contents. "At least it's food," Cal said, debating between eating the second packet now or later. "Anyway, bringing you supper isn't the only reason I stopped by," Shay said. Her disgust had disappeared, replaced now by a more serious expression. Jaren wants to speak with you. It took some doing and more than a little persuasive promising, but he's agreed to let you tag along with the crew tomorrow night. Tomorrow night? Cal blurted, nearly dropping the second food packet. Why aren't we leaving now? The longer we wait, the more danger Ovette is in. Shay shot up her hands. Whoa, calm down, tough guy. Ovette isn't in any real danger just yet. There's still time before the linking. Cal's brow furrowed. He swore he'd heard that term somewhere before. The memory was distant, just out of reach. The more he thought about it, the more difficult it became to recall. The linking is a type of ceremony involving the gifted and the chains, Shay said, as if reading Cal's thoughts. Something about binding the two together. It's all a very hush hush behind closed doors kind of thing. What happens during the ceremony? Don't know. Well, is it something that hurts? Will it kill Ovette? Don't know, she repeated with a smile. Okay then. Is there some reason why the linking can't happen today? Cal asked, his cheeks growing hot. I don't know, Shay shrugged. Hush, hush. Remember? Well, what do you know then? All I know is that the Davins want the gifted. Ovette, Cal interrupted. Her name is Ovette. Shay dipped her head before speaking again. The Davins want Ovette, and that is reason enough for us to want to stop them. Pushing herself off the bed, she beckoned for Cal to follow her. Come on, we don't want to keep Jaren waiting. He can be even more impatient than you. Shay led Cal down a long hallway. Pictures of pompous looking people lined the walls. Some were clad in typical merchant outfits, others dressed in what looked like formal military wear. There were even a few paintings of fruit. Why anyone would want a painting of a bowl of fruit hanging on their wall was beyond Cal. Just looking at it was making him hungry all over again. Oh, by the way, what's with you and Jaren's son? Jord, was it? Shay said, thankfully not looking at Cal as he glared at the paintings. Seems like there's more than a little tension there. The question didn't take Cal by surprise. Not really. It was bound to come up sooner or later, and even he had the wherewithal to realize it was better to hash this out before they left for the Citadel. The knots in his stomach returned as he thought about all the times Jord had bullied him or one of the orphans. He likes to think he's better than others, because he was born into this. Cal gestured to the lavish displays of wealth. That such a difference in upbringing existed so close together in the city made that knot tighten. He thinks it's his duty, or right, or whatever, to make sure we never forget the difference. We? Shay asked. Me, Ovette, the kids from the orphanage, and I'm sure a bunch of people I've never met. Can't imagine that scap being any better with anyone else. Envy tinged the spite in Cal's voice, but he didn't care. The envy wasn't the real kind, the kind that would have made Cal regret where he came from. The conveniences Jord had to have grown up with, the daily struggles he'd likely not endured. Such luxury would have made his life easy, and that made Jord weak. Cal's struggles had made him who he was now, for better or worse. Don't you think you're judging him a bit harshly? Surely there's someone he values as a friend. Cal shook his head at her in response. The more he talked with her, the more of a mystery she became. He was used to people hiding things, but he could usually work out why. Maybe not what they wanted, but at least what they wanted from him. But not Shay. One moment she was aloof and purposefully irritating. The next, she'd be somber and almost caring. Now she was judging him for judging Jord? Tell that to Teston and Din, Cal said, walking past her. Well, you're going to need to cool it when we're in there. Jord is an important part of the plan. Without him, we won't be getting anywhere near the gift. Cal looked back as Shay stopped herself. Anywhere near Ovette, she corrected, shooting Cal a wink. Cal opened his mouth to say something, but debating the pros and cons of Jord had already grown wearisome. Shay didn't know what it had been like with him. She'd met him for 5 minutes in a place where he had to be on his best behavior. Whatever. Cal could agree to disagree. He'd let Jord win this round. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, Shay began, stopping in the hallway and leaning into her hip. Where's your brand? Don't have one, Cal replied, his chest growing a little tight. It had taken her longer than most to notice. He always hated this bit, and he hated that he hated it. A small part of him wished she had just not said anything, but it was going to happen sooner or later. Might as well just get it over with. Shay ran her gaze over every inch of Cal, pausing on his hands. He marked her pursed lips, the way she pressed them together into a fine line, figuring out the dark shame he carried around with him wherever he went. You're Hollowborn? She asked, her tone shifting from casual conversation to pointed question. Yeah, Cal replied, stone-faced. Cal waited for the insults, the suspicion. And you still went up against the Lord Inquisitor's hand? And you survived? She looked as though someone had just punched her in the gut. Her expression shifted from disbelief to amazement. I wasn't really thinking about it. I don't really remember what happened, Cal said. The color returned to her face, her amazement making Cal's cheeks flush. Not bad, handsome. She leaned in close, eyeing, enjoying Cal's awkwardness. Never met a Hollowborn before. Turning, she continued down the corridor and stopped outside a nondescript doorway. The frame itself held no significance, but it muffled the sound from inside well enough. Shay held the door ajar and gestured inside with a flick of her head. Come on, can't keep the important people waiting. Muffled but heated voices spilled out through the door, angry, urgent, and overlapping. Gruff tones that belonged to the kind of people who liked to make decisions for those they deemed beneath them. I'm sure this won't be painless at all, Cal muttered, steeling himself as he stepped forward. All eyes were on Cal from the moment he walked in. George scowled at him from the corner of a table, his arms tight across his chest. Behind him, Teston stood with his eyes glued once again to the floor, while Din mimicked his master's gaze. Next to George stood a man to whom he bore a striking resemblance, though a decade or two older. Cal figured that this was Jaren, George's father. Jaren's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto Cal, leaving no doubt that he shared his son's disdain. A grin tugged at the corner of Cal's mouth as he thought of George relaying all the encounters they'd had over the years. And now that same dirty Hollowborn was in their home, touching, tainting their belongings. Not taking his eyes off Jord, Cal ran his hand over the table, savoring the slight resistance of the polished grain. Shay took her place at the opposite end to Jaren. Sorry we're late. Shall we just pick up where we left off? She said, replacing her playfulness with authority. This was a mask Cal hadn't seen her wear so far. It made her look older, even more sure of herself, deepened the mystery of just who she really was. However, her sudden need to be serious did little to alter Jaren's grimace. I'd rather you start by explaining to me one more time why we need him here with us, Jaren said, stabbing a finger in Cal's direction. His deep voice filled the small space, made it feel even smaller. It carried little emotion, save for disappointment. I'm starting to think you're just making this up as you go along, Shay. Why, Jaren, is that a hint of worry I hear in your voice? Perhaps father was right. Perhaps the Igni cell has grown weak and complacent, too busy stuffing your faces and lining your pockets with the riches given to you by your Daven masters. Papers crumpled as Jaren closed his fist, his white knuckles shaking. I'd watch your tone if I were you, girl. Or what? You'll sell me out to the Davens, too? Shay replied. Jaren slammed his fist down on the table, scattering the documents he'd just crumpled. Talk to me like that again, girl, and it won't be the Davens that send you back to Barkus in a body bag, he growled. Shay's eyes thinned, her lips parted. I wouldn't be here if my father thought you could handle this on your own. The emergence of the Gyfted forced the Lord Inquisitor to leave the safety of the Sanctum Spire. And now that he has her, he'll need to take her to the Citadel to perform the linking. This means he'll be distracted. He'll be vulnerable. She dropped the seriousness from her voice and replaced it with something more alluring, something playful. Not even you could pass up an opportunity like this. Jaren rubbed at his face, thumb and forefinger pinching the bridge of his nose as he gave a long, drawn-out sigh. Look, Cal has already proven himself against the Lord Inquisitor's hand, and he has a personal connection with the Gyfted. He can be of use to us, Shay said. He barely survived, Jord chipped in. Jaren's gaze flicked to the side, his pupils wide as they bored holes in his son for speaking out of turn. But survive he did, Shay said, and that's more than anyone here at this table can say. Her gaze wandered over everyone as she spoke. It was clear from everyone's reaction that they'd heard of Cal's encounter with the man in black armor at the orphanage. The image of his faceplate, the orphanage fire reflected in its shadowy contours, flashed through Cal's head, and his stomach ached in response. And what of the hand? Jaren said. Where is he now? Likely at his master's side, Shay replied. It's rare to see one without the other. Rarer even than seeing either of them at all. And what is your plan for when we come up against him? Throw this child at him again and hope for the best? It was Jaren's turn to take on a mocking tone, although his was far more sinister than Shay's, more violating. I don't care what he's done, George snapped. He'd been trembling the entire time Shay and Jaren were talking. The idiot couldn't stand not being the center of attention. He's nothing but a filthy hollow-born. He had no place among us, he continued, not even bothering to hide his venom. This second outburst was enough to bring his father's gaze upon him in full, and the usually confident and arrogant Jord cowered from the scrutiny. There wasn't much difference in height between the two, but it was clear to everyone who was the boy and who was the man. That's enough out of you, Jared said, his words coming through bared teeth. Just because we need you for this does not mean you are the one in charge. I say who gets to be here. Not you, not anyone else. Me. Do I make myself clear? George didn't respond. Not verbally, at least. He held his father's gaze for a few seconds before deciding submission was the better course of action. A small wisp of smoke billowed from the table as Jaren's glowing palm singed the corner of a map. Cal hadn't noticed what was on the table as he entered, too focused instead on the actions from within the room. That had gone about as well as he'd expected. No one had flung any gift his way yet, which was something at least. The layout of an enormous fortress spread out before him on the table. The detailing around the outside looked as though it was built into something. One end had a circular opening that either opened up to the sky or bore down into the earth. Cal couldn't tell. He wasn't sure which part he was meant to be looking at. The same goes for you as well, Shay. Jaren's gruff brought Cal back to the conversation. He was pointing at Shay, his expression bearing the frustration he felt. Shay didn't buckle under his gaze as his son had. Instead, she acted coy, raising her hands and cocking her eyebrow. Jaren turned his powerful gaze on Cal, the crease in his brow deepening as he assessed what he saw. From the look on his face, he didn't see much, but his eyes told Cal something was going on behind the frustration. Felt awful being under his gaze, and try as he might, Cal couldn't help but look elsewhere, at anything else. Can you follow orders, boy? Jaren sneered. My name is Cal replied, trying his best to hide the waver in his voice. Jaren didn't respond. He just continued that awful glare of his. For the briefest of moments, Cal imagined what it must have been like to have grown up under such a gaze. It reminded him of the glare Lady Havisham could give him, only 10 times worse. I can, Cal said, dropping the bravado. There was no point in being defiant with Jaren. Cal needed to focus on what he was here for. He would use Jaren, use all of them, if it meant getting closer to Ovette. Judging from what my idiot son has told me, you can fight well enough, Jaren sneered. Cal wasn't sure if he was being complimented or if Jord was being admonished. He told himself it was likely a bit of both. Tell me, Hollowborn, how well can you handle a blade? I. It took Cal a second to answer. He'd always thought of himself as a fighter, but recent events had shown him how little he knew. I can learn. Jaren's glare deepened. Learn. Hmm. He waved a dismissive hand in Cal's direction. What good are you in a fight if you can't swing a sword? How are you planning on going up against someone who can channel? People rely on the gift too much. Makes them stupid. If you can get in close, you can attack before they have a chance to do anything. That didn't work on the hand. Now did it? Jaren's voice was low, accusing. No. A flutter of anxiety passed through Cal's chest. He didn't want to prove himself to Jaren, but he needed to prove he could be useful to the mission. He had to. But it worked on your son. Jaren grunted in response before returning to the fortress layout. This was as much of a signal of acceptance as this man would ever give out, Cal thought to himself. Listen up, Jaren said. If Shay's intel is correct. It is, Shay interrupted. She smirked at Cal and shot him another wink. Then our window of opportunity is coming up. We don't have time for second guesses and doubts. If any of you want out, now is the time to leave this room. Jaren scanned the room again, taking his time to look at each individual present. He paused on someone Cal hadn't noticed yet. A boy, younger than Cal, innocent looking, with mousy brown hair and a pair of oversized and over-repaired spectacles. Soot and oil smears covered his overalls, with several tools poking out of its many pockets. Jaren gave the young boy a curt nod, and given the last few minutes in his presence, Cal figured this might be the only sign of affection the man was capable of. The whoosh of paper brought Cal's attention back to the table. Jaren had removed the top map, revealing a more detailed layout of what he assumed was the fortress in question. None of us have ever been inside the citadel before. All we know is that it lies deep within Igni's heart, the center of the volcano, Jaren said. But that's where the smelt mines are, Cal said. Correct, Jaren said, his words clipped and tinged with frustration. George shot Cal a look of daggers from behind his father, and Shay coughed through a snigger. Thanks to my son, we've procured uniforms, armor, and everything else for a small team to wander through the mines unnoticed. To the common laborer, you'll look like any other prefect. George stood a little taller and looked a little prouder as his father spoke. Cal couldn't help but roll his eyes. This was the longest he and Jord had spent in the same place. Definitely the longest without them coming to blows. Once we're through the mines, we'll be in unknown territory, Jaren continued, tracing his finger through the corridors on the map. Cal tried to follow, but he wasn't sure which way was up and which way was down. Everyone around him watched Jaren's finger with rapt attention, so he pretended to do the same. However, Artemis here thinks he knows where the Lord Inquisitor will be. Artemis? Jaren gestured to the young boy in the corner, who was already in the process of laying out another map with yet another layout of another building. This side of rebellion was alien to Cal. He never could have imagined being a rebel would require so much planning, so much talking. A flush of heat crept up the back of his neck as he thought of the times he'd tried and failed to hinder the prefects that patrolled the embers. Up until now, he'd thought of himself as a rebel, a menace that the Davins were aware of. Being here, among real rebels, showed him just how little he knew, how much of a child he still was. Shrugging off the feeling, he returned his attention to Artemis. We all know the Great Chain runs into the heart of the volcano, but have any of us stopped to wonder where the chain came from? Or what purpose it serves? Artemis stopped to take in everyone's reaction. He was trying to mirror Jaren's gravitas, but his voice lacked the same gravel or pitch. Jaren paralyzed others with the glare of a predator waiting to make his move. Artemis's frown in comparison could have only been considered cute. He reminded Cal of the Littles. Anyone? No? Artemis continued. Exactly. We have all accepted that they are a part of our world. But what if there's some deeper connection with them and the gift? I mean, where did the gift come from? Why do some of us have it and some of us don't? Is it infinite? A resource that replenishes itself? Or will we one day run out of gift and be forced to live as Hollowborn? Cal gritted his teeth at the last comment, deciding it was better not to speak out of turn again. Get to the point, Jaren snapped. He balled his hands into fists, breathing heavily through his nose. Right. Apologies, Artemis replied, pushing his glasses back into place. There must be a point where the chain connects to the land, somewhere beyond the smelt mines, a point where one can touch the chain. That is where the gifted must be being held. The Lord Inquisitor is likely there as well. But why there? Cal asked. Not able to hold himself back, he continued. Why would Ovette be taken there? I'm glad you asked. Artemis beamed at the chance to further explain himself. The volcano and its destructive capabilities are a natural phenomenon. Here, and at other places like it, the gift would be different, more potent. I doubt this would make much difference for a regular giftling, as the limitations for channeling gift are set by our physical bodies. But the gifted is not held to such limitations. And the chain? Cal asked, trying his best to keep up. I was just coming to that. I believe the chains are a conduit for the gift,
Much like a giftling. I believe they absorb it. However, I'm afraid I do not know the purpose for this absorption. I have theories, but without the relevant data, I am unable to draw any definitive conclusions.
Right. This was all Cal could think to say.
Talk of the gift and the chain is all well and good, but what about the sides of the citadel? The entrance? How do we get inside?
Jord asked. Jaren didn't admonish his son for the interruption this time. In fact, his lips were parted, as though he had been just about to voice similar questions.
The mines burrow deep into the volcano. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that the citadel is probably beyond the mine's deepest point.
Artemis replied, directing his comment more to Jord than anyone else. The look Jord returned him offered all anyone needed to know about their relationship, or lack thereof. It was good to know there were other people who didn't follow Jord's every whim.
The uniforms I provided will only get us so far. There's no way for us to know whether or not the prefects guarding the citadel wear different ones. Without such markings, we'll stand out,
Jord said. Well then, we'll have to improvise. Shay's fingers gently brushed the edge of her jawline, as though she were tracing the contours of some unspoken idea. She'd remained quiet since her verbal match with Jaren, her posture both relaxed and alert at the same time. Once you're in, Cal will guard the entrance, while the rest of you find your way to the Lord Inquisitor, Jaren added. Cal's heart skipped a beat as the words sank in, and he was on his feet before he could stop himself. What? Guard the entrance? What about Ovette? I'm here to get her out. The words fell one after another. His chest was tight as it rose and fell in quick succession. The gifted is not your concern, Jaren said, not even looking in Cal's direction. Not my concern? Cal spat. If you want to be part of this mission, you need to learn your place, boy, Jaren snapped, still looking down at the map in front of him. I know my place, old man. It's by Ovette's side, getting her out of whatever the Davins have in store for her. Cal's cheeks burned as he spoke. You sound like you don't even care about her. Jaren slammed his fist onto the table, silencing the room. You're right. I don't. The veins in his neck bulged as he crossed the space. He stopped right in front of Cal, so close that Cal could smell the burnt tobacco and cheap wine on his breath. It was only now, being this close to him, that Cal noticed the flush in his cheeks and on the tip of his nose. What is one little girl to me when I have hundreds of lives to worry about? He threw his arm back, gesturing to everyone in the room. Their lives mean more to me than some fanciful little lass who I've never even met. I couldn't give fire and spit that she's the gifted. She is not the target. Flecks of spittle rained on Cal as Jaren spat his words. If she's not part of the plan, then why am I even here? Something warm and wet ran down Cal's cheek, and it took him a second to realize what it was. His throat closed off, stopping him from saying anything else. His body shook at the thought of not being there for Ovette. Good point. Jaren seethed, his stale breath wafting with every breathy syllable. He jerked his head to the side and stabbed a finger into Cal's chest. Get this shit out of my sight! Cal barged out of the room before anyone could respond, not needing to hear anything else Jaren had to say. Storming down the hallway, he tried in vain to push down the tightness in his chest. Cal grabbed anything he thought would be useful and threw it into a bag. A change of clothes, the dagger Lady Havisham had given him, and a few more of the ration packs that Shay had left behind. How dare Jaren say Ovette wasn't Cal's concern? What did he know? Some rich scap just deciding who's important and who's not? The door to the room creaked open, and Cal spun on his heels, his jaw clenched and his fists ready. half expecting another confrontation. Instead, he found Artemis hovering in the doorway, his expression timid, eyes darting to avoid direct contact. He held a metal tray topped with bandages and bottles filled with a clear liquid, their labels peeling and barely legible. Uh, can I come in? He said. The bottles on the tray clinked as he shifted on his feet, as if he were deciding whether or not to enter. The thumping pulse in Cal's head subsided, along with his desire to berate someone. He cleared his throat and turned back to his packing, hoping the redness in his cheeks had begun to fade. The shuffle of feet and the clink of glass let him know Artemis had entered. The latch clicked loudly as Artemis closed the door behind him, making the room feel a whole lot smaller. Shay told me you were hurt and that I should help clean your wounds, so here I am. Artemis gave a weak chuckle, trying his best to sound friendly despite his obvious nerves. If you could just, remove your tunic, I can begin. His shoes scuffed against the floorboards as he moved, and his breath held a lightness as he drew closer. Cal relaxed his shoulders as he turned, his posture softening to appear as non-confrontational as possible. He kept his arms folded, but try as he might, he couldn't fully quell the simmering anger in his chest, like a low burn just waiting to flare up again. Artemis's demeanor was different from earlier. During the meeting, he had seemed confident and giddy, a confidence that belonged to someone older and more experienced. Not that Cal had any idea how experienced Artemis was. For all he knew, this unassuming boy could be a stone cold killer. Now, though, all he saw was a teenager barely into his gift. His brand looked awkward, like it was two sizes too big. His fingers fumbled over the glass bottles, shaking as he tried to find the right one. Cal felt sorry for him. Your name's Artemis, right? Cal softened his voice, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his performative calm. The idea of leaving Ovette to the care of Jaren and his crew sat like hot coals in his throat. But this kid didn't deserve any of his aggression. Not yet, anyway. Artemis flicked his gaze up for a moment before returning it to the bottles. Cal's brow tightened, deepening the furrow that was already there. Gentle voice or no, he wasn't going to get any answers from the boy if he kept his expression all fire and thunder. Sorry, Cal said, rubbing a hand over his face. It's just been a long day. How about we start from the top? He held out his hand, low enough for Artemis's gaze to catch it. I'm Cal. It took a few seconds, but Artemis lifted his head, taking Cal's hand in his. Artie, he muttered. Not Artemis? Uh, you can call me that if you prefer. What do you prefer? Cal asked. Artie. Artie it is, then. Cal gripped his hand a little tighter, wobbling Artie's entire arm with a firm shake. Wandering over to the bed, Cal removed his tunic, wincing as the fabric peeled away the bandages Shay had placed earlier. Dark red and brown stains made it sticky and dry all at once. Artie set the tray of medical supplies down on the bed and knelt at Cal's side. The herbal smell from the liquid in the bottles brought back memories of Lady Havisham pouring tea for Leif, telling him it'd do good for his aging bones. Cal's chest ached as he pulled his attention away from the scent, leaving him hollow. Artie's two big brands started to glow, and translucent wisps of green flittered between his fingertips. He directed the wisps to the liquid inside the bottles, and it swirled, snaking its way onto the cleanest rag Cal had ever seen. Without taking his eyes off Cal's wound, Artie flicked his wrist, and the soaked rag floated toward Cal. Cal clenched his jaw, a sharp hiss escaping through his teeth as the cold rag pressed against his wound. Sorry, Artie stuttered. It's fine, Cal gritted, his eyes watering from the pain. I'm impressed you were able to walk around with this. Whatever you did pulled all the stitches out. He leaned in closer to inspect the newly opened wound, his voice dropping to a mutter.
Not like she did a very good job, though.
His gaze flicked nervously to Cal's face.
Don't tell her I said that, please.
Tell her you said what? Shay's voice accompanied the opening of the door. The thud of her boots on the floorboard followed as she entered the room. Cal's cheeks flushed and his eyes flicked toward his tunic lying next to him. Thankfully, Shay didn't seem to notice.
Uh, Nothing?
Artie chuckled. How's our hero doing? Should I call time of death? Shay joked. She leaned herself against a chest of drawers that looked like it cost more than anything in Ovette and Cal's secret spot. You knew, didn't you? Cal said, his voice low and accusing. You knew what Jaren had planned for me. Yes, Shay answered. Simple and clean. No bullshit friendliness or playful tone. You should have told me. Why? What difference would that have made? Because then I wouldn't be wasting my time here. I could have just gone straight to the Citadel. Straight to Ovette. You had no idea where it was. You still don't. I would have managed. No, Cal, you wouldn't have. Her words were clipped, her expression like stone. All you would have found is a quick death. You're not the daring rogue you think you are. Yeah? And you're. Ow! Pain prickled its way through Cal's side as Artie pushed a needle through reddened skin, a thin piece of wire string tied into a loop at the end. Cal did his best to ignore how raw the exposed area felt. Artie, can you give Cal and me a minute? Shay said. Artie looked away from his work, his fingers tipped with blood.
Fine. Just make sure the wound is covered. Otherwise, it'll just open back up again.
He looked like he wanted to say something else, but quickly closed his mouth. Instead, he shuffled out of the room as fast and unawkwardly as he could. Part of Cal wished he'd stayed, if only to make him feel less embarrassed about being topless. Shay waited for the click of the door closing before turning her attention back to Cal. She raised a finger to her lips, hushing him before he could say anything. Listen, your guarding the entrance is just part of the plan. I said I'd help you get to your Ovette, and I meant it. But Jaren, Cal started, confused by the immediate change in her tone. You let me handle Jaren, she interrupted. But we have to get one thing clear. The Lord Inquisitor comes first. Cal didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. After we take him out, there'll be nothing stopping you, us, from mounting a daring rescue, will there? I still don't trust you, Cal said. Honestly, that's probably smart. Shay sighed as she pushed herself off the chest of drawers and sat down next to Cal, edging closer to him. If you want out, you can leave. I won't try to stop you. But this plan requires 6 people. We need you, Cal. She was close. Cal hadn't noticed how good she smelled before. Clean. Stirring. He jolted as she placed her hand on his. I know this isn't how you envisioned rescuing Ovette, but this is the way. The best way. She kept her tone soft, almost sincere. I'm sorry if it felt like I was misleading you. I really wasn't trying to. Cal couldn't respond. His mind raced, but no words formed. He felt small and powerless next to her. Shay sighed again, longer this time. Just think about what I said, okay? Besides, oh, I nearly forgot, she said, pushing herself off the bed. Her sudden burst of excitement was enough for Cal to lift his head. Forgot what? Her devious grin returned, and she ducked out of the room, quickly returning with a long bundle of cloth. She propped it up against a chest of drawers she'd leaned on, the bottom hitting the floorboard with a thud. Try not to lose this again. Pretty sure Leif would have both our heads. Her grin widened as she left the room, turning her head one last time to see Cal's reaction. Good night, Cal. Cal pulled on the piece of string that had bound the bundle together. The cloth fell away, revealing a long since cared for sword. The blade darkened and dull. The pain in his stomach washed away, replaced instead by a lump in his throat and the thread of tears he'd been holding back since he'd gotten here. Cal startled awake, his heart racing as he blinked away the remnants of sleep. Confusion gave way to a flicker of shame, as he hadn't meant to doze off. Whatever Artie had done, whatever ointments or solutions he'd used, had all but numbed the pain in his stomach. It still throbbed every now and then, the body's way of telling him his heart was still working. Rubbing sleep from his eyes, he forced himself to get up. Leif's sword was propped up against the end of the bed, silent, watchful. The longer Cal stared at the blade, the more it seemed to draw him in. The silence deafened the room, the kind that presses down on you, makes you uncomfortable, too aware of yourself. Cal ran his fingers down the face of the blade, trying to imagine Leif wielding it as a younger man. The steel was cold to the touch, and despite the nicks and cracks that marred the blade's edge, telling stories of countless battles, it retained its sharpness. He held the blade across his palm, his sweaty fingers gripping the hilt tight. It was lighter than he remembered, though still heavy. The ointments Artie had used must have helped him. Still, the dull sheen of the blade made Cal want to believe otherwise. It was only now, staring at this blackened blade, that he realized how similar it looked to the dagger Lady Havisham had given him. Setting the sword down, he picked up the dagger to compare. Though smaller in size and shape, the two blades were identical. This realization sent a cold sensation that crept toward the base of his spine. He shrugged off the feeling, deciding food and thanking Shay were the order of business. The food packet she'd left served as a fine enough breakfast, and someone had left a jug of water at the side of the bed. Cal's face flushed at the idea of someone serving him. Did they not know what he was? Stepping out into the corridor, he made for the only other room in this house he knew, hoping Shay was there, or at the very least, someone who knew where she was. The room looked empty, the early morning light drifting through the pulled curtains. The table had been cleared of any papers or fortress layouts, the chorus of opinions absent. The empty room felt odd. How many rebel plans had this room seen? How many victories or failures had it endured? The rustle of papers from an adjoining room broke Cal out of his daze. Shay? Cal called as he entered. I just wanted to thank. Oh,
She's not here, hollow-born,
George snapped, not looking up from one of the map layouts from yesterday's conversation. The conversation Cal had been ejected from. He was dressed in a blue-gray undershirt, the material looking cheap and uncomfortable compared to the finery he usually liked to flaunt. The rest of the prefect armor lay to the side, waiting to be donned.
Why aren't you dressed in uniform?
Shay didn't tell you? Cal asked, surprised that nothing had been said.
Tell me what?
Why hadn't Shay said anything? Was she hoping he'd come around? He hadn't. He still had no intention of playing guard duty while they screwed around in the Citadel. Ovette was the only thing that mattered, and that hadn't changed. She had to know that hadn't changed. So why hadn't she told Jord he wasn't coming? Nothing, Cal said, trying his best to sound coy. Do you know where she is?
Likely in Father's study going over last-minute preparations, or getting herself ready for the mission. unlike some.
George shot Cal a derisive look, then returned to the layout. Right. Cal turned, not having the energy to deal with Jord. I'll find her myself.
I'd watch myself around her if I were you.
His voice dripped with the usual loathing, but this time it didn't feel directed toward Cal. At least not entirely. Cal turned back, locking eyes with Jord. What's that supposed to mean?
It means exactly what it sounds like. She is dangerous, and nothing good will come of fraternizing with someone like her.
Careful, Jord. You almost sound like you're starting to care about me. Jord tugged at the bottom of his uncomfortable-looking undershirt, his posture straightening.
What do you think she is here for?
To take out that Inquisitor guy.
Precisely. Taking out someone like that is going to require an individual with a particular set of skills. Skills that
He cast a gaze over Cal, his disgust obvious.
and certainly you, do not possess.
I've seen some of her abilities. So what?
Ignis breath, you're stupid, he scoffed. She's an assassin, you idiot hollowborn.
It made sense. The way she manipulated the gift, her aloofness, the look on her face when she'd killed that guard. It was her job to be disconnected, to not care about the kill. The thought sent a shiver down Cal's spine. So she's an assassin. What's that got to do with me? Cal asked, the pit in his stomach widening.
The Gyfted is a powerful boon to the Daven Empire. They cannot be allowed to use her.
Then why isn't getting her back part of the plan? Cal asked. The answer was obvious. He already knew what Jord was going to say. He just needed to hear it.
If Shay cannot get to the Lord Inquisitor, she has a secondary target,
Jord uttered. His tone was low, as if even he didn't want to admit the truth out loud. To not give the act life. To not make it real.
She's to ensure the use of the Gyfted's power is impossible.
Say it, Cal said, his hands balled into fists. Say it.
Shay is here to kill Ovet.